for decades. Julia Grosso from Vancouver to win it for Canada. Canada came. Canada conquered. Canada gold at Tokyo 2020.
You're listening to the Northern Fútbol Podcast, your home for everything Canadian soccer, with Brendan Dunlop, Alex Gangué-Ruzic, and here's your host, Ben Steiner.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Fútbol Podcast, episode 182 of Northern Fútbol. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gangué-Ruzic and Brendan Dunlop, and the wild month of men's soccer is finally behind us. Spain, European champions, and Argentina, after a chaotic Copa America final, come away as Copa America champions. Canada, of course, out in semifinal, but lose 4-3 on penalty kicks in the bronze medal game in what was maybe one of the best games that the Canadian men have ever played, and it was a rotated team. And then we'll also get into the Canadian women as they ramp up for the Olympics, a friendly against Australia, ending in a 2-1 win, even though it was a B friendly, so stats don't count. Nichelle Prince and Evelyn Vienne getting the goals in that one, and then they've also got one more test friendly against Nigeria before kicking off their Olympic campaign against New Zealand on July 25th. But Alex, Brendan, have you caught your breath yet? Month is over.
It's a weird feeling the day after. Like there's a hangover. It's like an emotional hangover. Like you're clearly still in work mode because you did a 47-second intro, so you're still in it. But for me, it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to work at the same pace today. I don't have to watch any games. What am I going to do with my life? There's a lot more contemplation and reflection, but yeah, appreciation for the month that we watched and got to talk about here on Northern Fútbol, which was really nice.
Yeah, it's like it's a nice unwind. You wake up, you don't have to worry about throwing something on or what's going on this evening. You can just kind of breathe a little, just exhale. So I think it's going to be good little 2 weeks, because or not even, it's like a week and a half, and then the Olympics start right up again. There's never any rest for anything. If you're into that deep into the weeds, there's the men's U20 starts next week, the CONCACAF qualifiers for the U20 World Cup. So it's like if you there's never a moment to sit still in this sport. So you take the little pockets like this where you can and focus on the next step.
The shocking thing to me today was I checked my FootMob app and it said, no games in the leagues that you're following. And I was just like, wow, I haven't seen that in a while. It's always, packed full of international, MLS, CPL. There was nothing today. And that's a nice little break, I guess.
Missed opportunity for CPL schedulers, eh? They should have jammed up a bunch of matinees, like Mondays and Tuesdays, to get the wave of people that still want to be distracted and unproductive at work. Big missed opportunity by the CPL. Should have had a Tuesday 1 p.m. game.
We did see that Canadian Championship game against CF Montreal for Forge, that school day game. That was Wednesday at noon or something like that.
It was 11 a.m. local.
Yeah.
It was Alex waking up on the West Coast at 8 a.m. there. It's crazy.
It was morning coffee footy. Well, not much coffee because I don't really drink coffee, but it was morning tea and
not
footy.
much footy either, to be fair. That wasn't the best first leg.
Of course, a lot to be excited about with the men's national team. I thought it was one of the best performances that the men's national team has ever done. But what do you guys think of that Canadian men's national team performance there?
What a roller coaster, man! It was crazy because they were definitely the better side, right? And the better side doesn't always win. They did in the Copa final, and they did in the Euro final on Sunday. But on Saturday night, man, yeah, Canada played so well, and it was just couldn't finish again. It's the same story, right? If they capitalize on those chances, we're talking about a third place finish. We're talking about a very, very different Saturday night in Charlotte. I don't think it changes too much, to be honest. I've thought about this a lot. Beating Argentina, being in the final, getting blasted in the final by Colombia, that's a different story if that's how things had played out. Finishing fourth, losing on penalties, as opposed to finishing third and winning on penalties, or Tani scores one of those and you win, I don't think it's as much of a needle mover. I think we still come away with so many positives from this experience that finishing fourth was the equivalent of finishing third to me, Alex.
Yeah, well, you don't run the books at Canada Soccer, so that million, you weren't seeing that million, so that's fair. No, in terms of just assessing the performances, what this means for the group, you're right. It doesn't really change too much, especially the fact that they went out in that third place game, and it's more about performances, new faces, Jesse Marsh goes out with don't call it a B team, but to some it was a B team, and he goes out and gets a bunch of good performances from some depth guys. Like, he learned so much, right? That I don't think the third or fourth place, I think it's more of something where, of course, he would have loved to give those guys medals around their necks. He would have loved to give in the federation that extra $1 million and just that extra moment. But I don't think it ultimately changed too much about what we learned, and it just shows that for penalties, Canada still has some work to do. And hey, maybe that practice of an extra penalty shootout, they can learn little things that they got away with against Venezuela, but not so much against a team like Uruguay, who their penalty shootout performance against Brazil was immaculate, and they followed it up with another perfect showing against Canada.
It's that inherited trauma that we took from the English. Penalties. Good.
What I thought was, I looked at that lineup and it was a B-plus lineup. I think everyone can admit that was not Canada's first choice lineup because it didn't have Canada's best players in it to start. And I was just impressed by the complete totality of that performance because, Canada didn't look like, first of all, it was a second choice lineup. Canada didn't look like they were fazed by the opponents that they were facing. And they looked like they wanted to win the game, which I thought was going to be a challenge as well. But it was just a clean, brave performance in a lot of ways. I think, Kone on the second goal, the ability to take that space and just drive into it, that takes confidence. That takes, some cojones to take that opportunity and get that shot off. And I didn't necessarily think Kone had that power of a shot in him, that it created a goal for Jonathan David on the second chance. I would have loved to see them come away with the bronze medal. I do think that it's significantly different to come away with the fourth place than the bronze medal because, what would a bronze medal have done for this group's confidence? We saw it with the women's team at London 2012 when they finally got over the line and got a medal there. That getting a medal, I think, I didn't care about it at the start of the game, but I certainly cared about it in the final moments, and I think that Canadian team did as well. But I also think it still would have been better to beat Argentina and get, blasted 4-0 in the final against Colombia. Because, to play a final, especially with the situation that went down in the final, which we can touch on as well, I think that would have been a good experience for Canada.
The Olympics, like, bronze medal's actually a medal, though, right? Like,
fair.
This tournament, it's a designation. There's not a third place game at the Euros. Like, teams don't get up for third place games the way every team does, at the Olympics or should, right? So I think that's a big difference. I think getting to the semifinals was a trophy in itself, right? The goal was we all hoped they'd get out of the group, show well against teams that belong in this tournament that have a pedigree. They won one of those games. They beat Peru. They held their own twice against Argentina. But in getting to the semi, to me that was the real trophy. In terms of confidence, I think all these guys are flying. All of these guys are flying. They're all going to go back to their clubs, and that's part of what makes the Tejan Buchanan injury so sad. Is like, imagine how he would have done it preseason with a full preseason that he was already gearing up for, and he won't get the chance, to have that opportunity. But so many guys will, and so many guys will in new places too, which is exciting.
I think the perspective changes because Canada is the final team among three other CONMEBOL teams. Because it was, it's not outrageous to think on paper the U.S. could have been on the other side of the bracket in like a U.S. versus Colombia semifinal. Was that possible? And say Canada faces the U.S. in the third place game. I think it changes. I think the fact for Canada that either way, you win and get like a Colombia or Uruguay in the final, or you lose, you get Colombia or Uruguay in the third place match, that you were either way going to get a good learning lesson, I think kind of alters the perspective. Whereas if they were up against like a U.S. or maybe, Panama somehow upset Colombia and ended up in that third place game, I think the perspective does change. It's worth, throwing out there.
I'll jump to your questions as well. And from Jake and Nick Spirit, the passing was incredible to watch today. Was it the change of formation to the 4-2-3-1 or the change of lineup that made the bigger difference? Nick Spirit says he thinks it's a more fluid system. I think formations, when you look at sort of under a similar coach, when you're trying to play a similar way, they don't mean as much because you can look at the way that Canada played in their games in the 4-2-2-2 or 4-4-2 or 4-4-1-1 or whatever you want to call it, and the 4-2-3-1, and it was similar. You had a different look in the attacking space, and I thought we saw better from Teni Oluwaseyi than we saw from Jonathan David and Kyle Larin throughout, and I was really hoping that we'd see a moment where we'd see David and Oluwaseyi in the lineup as well, and I'll eventually get his pronunciation down correctly. But I think that that's a dynamic way to go about things. in terms of formation, I think it's all fluid because, you see it structured when Canada's defending, but when they're attacking, you didn't necessarily see that.
I think there was a big difference, but I think it's mostly just the personnel. And I think you could tell the difference in quality you get when you have an extra midfielder on the park versus two forwards that are trying to occupy the same space and aren't receiving the ball. It makes so much of a difference where Canada had Kone, Choinière all shuttling the ball along with Osorio as well. Like, it just made such a difference to have that extra body to push the ball out to Ali Ahmed and Jacob Schaffelberg so they could get into isolated 1v1s more often. It helped Oluwaseyi because all he had to do was just run, and he figured, okay, I'd get the ball in some aspects, right? Like, it's less just, I don't know, with the 4-2-2 with Larin and David out there, it's just a lot of guys looking at each other. A lot of guys like, oh, is this my space? Is that your space? Oh, you're in my space. A lot of just, standing still because you have two strikers. So if one's doing a lot of hard work, where do you kind of fit in? I don't know. The 4-2-3-1 made a huge difference, I feel. And I think it's no coincidence that Canada looked their most fluid offensively. And really, again, it was arguably probably their best offensive performance of the tournament, right? You score 2 goals. You have the most XG of any game you play. You had, 5 big chances. This was a game for Canada where offensively they looked at their best. And maybe if Jonathan David's in there from the start and not Tani Oluwaseyi, he scored 3-4 on top of what they did. So I think the 4-2-3-1, if you're Jesse Marsh, that has to open up a lot of questions because it doesn't change the way you defend. All it does, like you saw it, Jonathan Osorio was just pressing like a striker. That's an easy change to have. And the fact that your offense looked that much more fluid, and you didn't even have a David on the field, you didn't even have an Alphonso Davies on the field, Tajon Buchanan, imagine that. Imagine telling anyone before the tournament that, yeah, Canada's best offensive game, you're starting David and Davies on the bench and Buchanan's injured. What? You're starting some guy who was playing in USL last year. You're starting a midfield trio of 2 MLS guys with Kone. You got 2 wingers in MLS. It shows that the personnel can make a huge, huge difference. Of course, this also shows that Canada's depth, and we'll get into Canada's depth, that it's a lot better than, maybe even Jesse Marsh realized. And had he maybe realized it earlier, it could have changed how fatigued guys got throughout the tournament. But I really like that formation. I'm very curious because if that's, some rotated guys, how does that formation look with Jonathan David? Spoiler alert, only 25 minutes on the field. He scored in it. So certainly he looked to benefit from being able to lead the line on his own. So there's a lot to like about the 4-2-3-1, although I'm sure the listeners won't be surprised to hear me gush about it.
So super sub Jonathan David. That's the solution, boys. That's the takeaway. It was cool to see, 10 MLS guys or MLS experienced guys, obviously Kone and Luc de Fougerolles, compete like that, right? I've been critical of some of the MLS guys in this team that I didn't think they were at that level, and look, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Choinière was great. Choinière really, really complimented Kone in ways I didn't think that he would. We know the skill set Ahmed's got, and he was able to show it. And I found it funny that setup that Ahmed had for Tani, which was from a slightly different position. It was a shorter ball in than Tajon's ball for Alphonso Davies for the goal against Croatia, but it was almost a replica version of that goal. And then Tani finished like me in front of the net at Co-Ed League with just this wild header that had no chance of going in. But I did like to see the offensive chances they created and how it kind of came from everywhere. But the distinct standout too, and obviously everyone who's gushing about Ishmael Kone noticed this, there was a distinguishable engine. When Canada played their best 11, there's not really like a one engine player. It is a full flowing fluid unit, or it isn't fluid, and that's the problem, right? Whereas he was at the top of his game and brought everyone along with him, and it all moved through Kone, which was amazing to see, particularly since he lost his spot because he hadn't looked so great in the system before. And for anytime you see a 22-year-old guy marshal an entire squad like that, a squad that doesn't have a lot of chemistry with each other either, that says a lot about the player.
Shades of me when I subbed in for your co-ed league, Brendan. The young guy comes in and makes a complete impact, just elevates everybody around him.
Yeah, exact shades of you. That's it. I thought you were going back to the Tani thing. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you are Ismail Kone.
If I speak.
Yeah, I am bad Tani. That's it. Yeah.
Just joking, of course. But we'll jump into another question from Guava Delic. What did you guys think of Marsh's substitutions in this game? I was surprised that Schaffenberg wasn't subbed out since he seemed to run out of gas in the second half, especially with how well Ahmed was playing. And from Nelson Carveo, it's our fault we lost today. When we got the lead, we should have slowed the tempo, wasted time, and killed the game. And we played like we were behind. This team needs to learn how to close games from this experience. And on that second point, I think they did show experience to close the game. We saw Theo Bair, bring the ball into the corner and try and slow things down when he could have gone for a goal. And we saw, a lot of changes from Jesse Marsh that were important changes to give Canada the best chance of winning this game. We saw, the best players come on the pitch, players who have the experience of shutting down games like this at the club level, and they weren't able to get it done. Luis Suarez, classy finish in stoppage time to force penalties, and Canada didn't quite get the luck they needed in penalties, and a couple poor penalties as well from guys that, based on that first penalty shootout, you'd think would have scored. But I do think that this is an important experience for Canada, but I don't think it's necessarily one that they weren't ready for, because we did see them try to close this game down. They just failed in doing so.
I agree with you. I don't agree with the listener there, that the criticism. Like, to learn how to finish games and beat top 10 teams and teams out of your region, you have to play top 10 teams and teams out of your region. This is the first time this team has ever done that. So allow for some learning, please.
I'd say yes and no, because I think it was also an element of naivety that, again, this team is young, but there is experience in this team. And it's little things. I think, because I went back and kind of rewatched that sequence before the goal. Just kind of curious to see how it played out, because it happened all so quick. Canada rushed the play. And that's the thing when you're up, because that's the one thing I disagreed with, is that you don't need to go into full ball in the corner, kill the game mode, because that doesn't change too much most of the time, unless you have one of those freaks that can keep the ball in the corner for 45 seconds, shielding off guys. Think of Kevin De Bruyne, Man City versus Man United a few years ago, where he had that ridiculous where him and Bernardo Silva wasted 3 minutes in the corner on their own. I don't mind going for a goal, and I rewatched the sequence. I didn't mind that Chouanier or Bair made that pass to David, who found Chouanier, who Schaffelberg went in. Okay, great. But what I didn't like was the moment where Dane Sinclair makes that super save on Luis Suarez. You get that moment you should have, kind of taken that as a warning sign that you need to calm things down. And I rewatched that sequence. I think it took, because that Luis Suarez shot and the St. Clair save happened at, I think it was 91:05 or something like that, or whatever it was. Canada Suarez ends up scoring. It was 35 or 40. It was literally 30 seconds later. That can't happen. And rewatching, the ball goes up to Schaffelberg right away, and he immediately ran in and went and tried to create a chance, which again, I don't mind the aggression to go and get that third goal, but I think there also is something where take your time. There was zero reason to rush it, where you can wait, you can go. And I think that's where it was a bit of naivety from Canada to just rush things, to not realize the circumstance of, I think it's different to play and kill out a game versus actually go and get that third goal. And I think those are lessons that Canada will learn. And I think it's worth noting that Jesse Marsh made a very interesting point after the game, saying that he was a bit disappointed. He wanted Canada to close out the game, but that he had already made all his subs by the 75th minute. And as we remember, they're all pretty aggressive subs, right? He brought in an Alphonso Davies, he brought in a Jonathan David. For example, I think had the game been, had he made his last sub before Canada or after Canada had scored, Stefan Eustáquio's on the pitch. Heck, maybe even a third center back's on the pitch. He had already made a lot of aggressive subs, so I think the kind of in the players' minds, they were thinking, let's go get that third. Let's go be aggressive. And Jesse Marsh's mind is I don't mind that, but guys, tone it down. You guys are playing a wide open game when you're leading. You're just never going to win that game. So I do think this was a massive learning lesson for Canada, but I also think it would be, you can call it naive, because I think there's no reason why a team like Canada can't close out the game, and that there was no reason for them to make some of those mistakes at that time. But perhaps to that first point, just to round things off, Jacob Schaffelberg did look a little tired. Rewatching those last 5 minutes, you could tell he was a bit dead on his feet, and I don't think he rushes those crosses. I don't think he pushes as hard if he's maybe not as tired. He deserved to go a full 90 because he's been that good alternative, but you could tell he kind of ran out of gas at the end.
And from Rude Trude, what unlocked Canada's creativity in this match, and will we look back at this game as a turning point for Canada's player selection and style of play? And I think we will, because you look at some of the performances that we saw. We saw Luc de Fougerols get his first real significant minutes for Canada. Is he a starting center back? Probably not at this point, but, he will be over the next 10, 12, 15 years for this men's national team if he goes all the way until he's, late 30s. And then I do think that we're probably seeing Ali Ahmed a lot more. This was the first time that we saw Ali Ahmed get a start in this tournament, get significant minutes in this tournament outside of the 30 or so minutes he got in the semifinal, and he showed very well. I would love to see him in the starting 11 if there's a place for him going forward. Maybe that's an opportunity to get Davies into more attacking positions, even though Marge seems pretty hard set on having him as a left back, and that's something that I would side with as well. But I do think that we started to see a lot from this Canadian team. There were some things that I thought were confirmed as well. Choinière isn't cut out to start in a game like this. Dane Sinclair is the second goalkeeper. Those are probably two things we already knew, and Ishmael Kone can, completely boss a game. Kenny Oluwasi probably has a worthwhile spot getting more minutes as well, but those were kind of my takeaways, Brendan.
I think the thing with Kone is, and we need to see a bigger sample size, right? We only have a year and a half of him in Europe, and the English League Championship is very different from the English Premier League, and it also changes during the season based on where your club is. It makes the experience very, very different. Ligue 1 will be completely different. I do think that his game at this level, the performances that we saw at Copa, both the good ones and the bad ones, I do think his game is more suited in France for him to find some type of consistency very quickly. And that'll be the big key, right? Because even with Alphonso Davies, there are days when we say, oh, no, he wasn't as great, or it didn't have as big of an impact. But if you were to go and study all of the plays, all of the decisions, there is an element of consistency within Fonzie's game that sets those elite players apart, and that is a big difference with some of the guys that we're talking about that either aren't at this level or are distinguishably B-class guys. And with Kone, man, he really can be the next superstar. But to your point about Ali Ahmed, at the Gold Cup, I was pitch side for the Guadeloupe game. I was I was stadium hosting, and someone said, "Man, these I don't know these two guys. Who's Schaffelberg, this guy with this great mullet, and who's Ali Ahmed?" I'm like, "Man, both of these guys are going to be serious players in 26." And I think it was match day -1. Before that, I'd passed by Herdman during training, and Ahmed had done something. I'm like, "This guy," and he looks at me, and goes, "You're going to be watching this guy for a long time." And I was like, you don't need to make that comment. That wasn't, what are you, planting a seed in this reporter's brain? It worked because I've paid very close attention to Ali Ahmed ever since, because of that one moment and that exchange with him. And you can see it why these guys get so excited. And that's the cool thing that we're in this space now. A lot of us will have these conversations with assistant coaches or head coaches, and they just kind of peel back a little bit as to what they see. People rave about Luc de Fougerols, rave about him. Why is this teenager in there? Because he has a quality that we just haven't seen before, and he's just a teenager. He's just developing. He needs more experience internationally and at club level, and you're going to see it shine through. So oftentimes when we throw around you're going to see this guy for 10 years, 15 years, there's not many dudes that play in a national team for that long. Angel Di Maria is someone that is on the short end of that at 14 years as a national team star, right? Someone just hanging up the boots now. But I think de Fougerols is someone that we'll be saying that about, and Ahmed and Schaffelberg will have a decade in this team and be stalwarts and real veterans.
So tongue in cheek, Brendan. So you're telling me Herdman told you that, and you still didn't think Ahmed was ready for this tournament?
That's right.
Yeah, well, I think to the earlier point, the big change remains the 4-2-3-1 and the fluidity that was provided by having the extra midfielder and the freedom that it gave, everyone involved. And I think that's a huge thing to look at going forward. Looking at this midfield, I would disagree with Ben's earlier point about Choinière. I thought it took him a minute to get used to the speed of the game, as you saw earlier with some decisions, but once he was in it, he and Kone were fantastic. And that's Choinière and Kone. There wasn't a true six out there Choinière. He's used to having Samuel Piet alongside him in a double pivot in Montreal. Meanwhile, Ishmael Kone is used to having that double pivot of him and Eustáquio with Canada. They didn't have a true six, and they got the job done. And Choinière really grew into the game. You could see his fitness, his decision-making, his bit of that creativity. He was involved in some of Canada's best passing moves. It shows that him going forward, he's absolutely a candidate to look at alongside Eustáquio and Kone. Same goes for an Ali Ahmed. I liked what from him was that he was playing as a winger, but he can cut inside and combine. I think of that near assist he provided for Oluwasi in the second half, where he was receive the ball like a midfielder, turn like a midfielder, played a through ball like a midfielder. He provides you some flexibility that if you're playing him on the wing or if you're playing him in midfield, I think that shows why he kind of deserves, a bit of a look. So yeah, there's honestly, I think part of it was personnel, and I think part of it was the personnel. But again, I wasn't too surprised. There's a reason why when I saw the squad, I know you saw Uruguay, you see a rotated team, you think, man, Canada's going to get plastered. Okay, I thought maybe it was going to be tough for them to win, no doubt. But at the same time, these are guys who've been knocking on the door for a while. Choinier's been in camps for a year now, knocking on the door. Ahmed's been in camps for a year now, back to John Herdman and Brendan's story there. A lot of these guys have been on the cusp for a while now, so I think it was really great to step up and show why, we've been saying, okay, maybe Ahmed deserves a look as a third midfielder, maybe Choinier deserves a look, and I'm very curious to see how Jesse Marsch blends this in with the first team guys, or at least the A guys, where where does Jonathan David fit in with this, Alphonso Davies, because there could be some fun combinations, and I think in this game we started to see the next evolution of what Jesse Marsch's CanMNT looks like.
Just to be clear, Herdman did not tell me, hey, Ahmed's ready to start Copa America next summer. He just said, look, this guy's going to be a superstar for a long time. Pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm saying. So you gotta buy stock early. I think John Herdman was saying, if you buy stocks now, it's like the early days of Amazon. You're going to get your money's worth. He was just saying, don't be too late, Brendan, when Ali Ahmed balls out at Copa America and you're like, darn, I was sitting here saying he shouldn't start. He was giving you some financial advice.
And from North Van, Steve, was this Kone's best performance in a Canadian shirt? And I would say it was. He was dynamic. I don't think there's another game where he stands out as much. Sure, he played, well at the World Cup, and he played well throughout this tournament. But this game was outstanding from him. He was 2 for 2 on shots. I have his stats up in front of me: 70 touches, 2 in the opposition box. 11 passes into the final third, including, several times where he carried the ball into the final third and exploited space in midfield. He was a joy to watch. I think that was easily his best performance in a Canadian shirt.
Alex, I'd love to get your take on this, because I've been thinking about, what were some of the reasons why he stood out like that? Is it just, did he have a point to prove? Did he like the leadership role? Did he feel, like an established person that could take more liberties and more freedoms? And there are some players in all sports, but especially in this sport, that need that in order to play remotely near their level. Rarely is that a young player. Rarely is that someone with, as few miles on the legs as Ishmael Kone at 22, with a 2 years worth of international experience now, just barely under his belt. But he might be one of those guys. He might be the guy that, to be at his best, he needs to be given an engine type of role. Which in this scenario was perfect, and going forward in his career, we'll see how he integrates that. But that might be it, because he was the guy that night against Uruguay. That's why he looked his best, and why maybe he didn't look as sharp in some of the other games where he obviously wasn't the guy.
So keep an eye on what Roberto De Zerbi will do with Kone at Marseille, is all I'm saying, because a lot of what De Zerbi did at Brighton was a 4-2-3-1, and he kind of had more of a 6, and then someone alongside him doing a lot of the shuttling. That would often be like a Caicedo before he got sold to Chelsea would be the 6, and then but alongside him you saw different players, like a Alexis McAllister, or sometimes it was a Pascal Gross. I think Kone profiles a little closer to McAllister just in terms of style of play than he does a Gross, who's more of like a pure passing midfielder. I think Kone is really going to be asked to be that box-to-box shuttler in a 4-2-3-1, and I think if you're Jesse Marsch, you're sitting there just clasping your hands, because that's kind of exactly what he's asked of Kone this tournament. Double pivot, be the shuttler, be the guy, be the box-to-box guy, and it's great because he can just take games over the way he was just everywhere. He demands the ball. He wants to be on the ball. He wants to make things happen. That's what you want from a midfielder. You don't want a shy midfielder who, sometimes you see that from guys where they pretend to be open, they pretend to run around, but they don't really actually want the ball. They just kind of want to occupy space. No, Kone wants to get the ball, deorganize defenders, be chaotic. So no, it's super great. And for what it's worth, just to put a bit of an asterisk, I don't think the question was that Kone's best game as a CanMNT player, because at this point every game is his best game, the way he seems to improve other than that blip at the Copa America. I think Steve was asking, actually, was that the best ever CanMNT performance? And I am curious, because it's tough to gauge, because probably a lot of the best CanMNT performances were before our time. But definitely this tournament definitely added a few to the list of top performances we've seen from individual Canadian players.
As someone that's watched this team a lot before your time, I could say that the best spell that this team has played collectively has been in this time. Since Herdman's arrival in this ascension, that Gold Cup winning team in 2000, they had some good moments. They also weren't playing, A-list opposition. They played Colombia in an invited final. They played Mexico at a time where it was very much David versus Goliath, and David had won. I'd love to go back and stack, that win over Mexico in 2000 against some of these, but the game was so different, right? It really, we say this about 50s baseball and the hitters of the 90s or hitters of today. I never realized the gap that big in soccer, but you're seeing it now. You're seeing it now as the game has evolved over the last 12, 15 years, that 20, 24 years ago is a completely different game.
Yeah, I mean, I just came across some random Premier League highlights on Twitter the other day from the 2005 season.
Yeah.
And it looked like a different sport,
Yeah.
right? The more long balls, more physicality. It's a fancier game now because you can go about it in that way. The technology's allowed, coaches and analysts to play players like chess that they weren't necessarily doing before. And I think the neat thing about Canada, and Ollie Platt made this good point as well, is because we don't really have a structured development system very well in this country, and there's a lot of holes in where players fall through. Of course, you see guys like Kone, who eventually got into the academy. You see guys like Bombito, who fell through the cracks and found his way still into the national team. But you're seeing that little bit of flair, that originality that maybe you don't see in England, where it's all streamlined right on through the club system. And so I think that when you're looking at Canada developing into the future, you don't necessarily want to lose that, even if you do get more structured in your player development. But Canada has a bit of a mix between having that flair of the mid-2000s and then also bringing in that sort of rigidity. And I think we've seen that sort of more structured element from a Marsh team where Herdman, got the brotherhood and all of that, but he was definitely outcoached at moments. I think back to that Nations League final last year, and he was definitely outcoached in that moment by BJ Callahan on the other side for the U.S. at that point. So, yeah, I think when you look at where Marsh has gotten this team tactically, he's been able to take some of those sort of like looser players and looser personalities, but not completely lose that. And so that's a good balance where the CanMNT is at, and it's important they don't lose that.
That's such a good point about having flair included in a plan that can be very rigid, but not rigid the way it was in the past. And that was kind of the problem, that Canada would just play in this rigid formation. There was no individuality to it. Through the 2000s, and I'm very biased here, but through players like Dwayne De Rosario, whose flair was undeniable, and you just couldn't shut that down. You now have that throughout the team. It's not just one player. So now they've been able to build a system, or are attempting to build a system that rewards and encourages still that individuality, but in a system, as opposed to it would have been rogue before, And there were times where with D-Row especially, it was rogue, and it didn't work for the team necessarily. So. Yeah, that's an exciting part to see this team kind of evolve like that. There is so much personality in the team, and there were some strong personalities in those teams of the past. Huge personalities, big voices, big egos. Great guys. It's amazing to see this brotherhood come back, because I think we all thought the Gold Cup last year that it was lost and it might not come back again. But they're totally reborn and rejuvenated under Jesse Marsh as a whole. And September can't come fast enough for me, boys. I really wish September was sooner.
Yeah, I think as well, you look at this team and they really, captured the hearts of Canada again, because through 2023, there wasn't that. Really, since the World Cup, they hadn't done that. A lot of the hiccups that Canada Soccer went through really disenchanted a lot of people when it came to supporting the men's national team in particular, and that, when the labor fight really, hit its stride with the women's national team as well, that having this tournament to really rekindle people's love for the men's national team was big ahead of 2026. And we saw some new faces. We saw some, a new approach, and people seem to like that new approach. But on your point about personalities as well, you can have a big personality off the pitch, and then on the pitch, you can kind of shrink. The thing about this team is they don't shrink. they keep that originality. They keep that sort of flair and personality when they come on the pitch. And then Marsh has been able to quickly fit that into a new system that gets the best out of every player that's in the 11 most of the time. And I think that's been, a nice change for this men's national team, and helped them, rekindle that love of the country that we saw as well.
Yeah, say this Canadian team, right? They've got the personalities, they've got the flair. It's just how do you express that on the field? And I think it's been interesting to see that a guy like Jesse Marsh hasn't seemed to put the reins on a guy like Jacob Schaffelberg when he plays. You kind of want him to just keep that directness, that fluidity, that freedom. Ali Ahmed, you saw with how he was able to play, because he's one of those guys. He's a street baller. I think it's interesting that Canada, some of these guys they've got, they're all naturally street ballers. Ali Ahmed will tell it, right? Like, he has such a non-conventional development path. Yusmail Kone as well, right? Like, he plays like it's a game on a local pitch in Montreal, no matter if it's the occasion. And I think that's something that can help a lot to find that rigidity tactically, where you need guys to be disciplined, you need guys to fill certain X's and O's and to know where they are on the field, but at the same time not lose some of that essence, that magic, that sparkle. And finding that balance can often be the key for good managers. You see that with Argentina, where, man, off the ball, it's rigid, it's tactical, it's physical. But then on the ball, these guys just come alive, and it's almost like there's not tactics to what they do offensively. It's just like smart players, cerebral players reading what they need to do in the final third. And I think that's kind of been one of the interesting learnings of this Pep Guardiola era, is where you can really hammer home the tactical side of the offensive game until guys are like robots, and you know how to cut back and get into certain areas and zone 13 of the box and all these things. Whereas at the same time, even Pep Guardiola himself has realized that by bringing in guys like Doku and Grealish, that there's a tactical X factor in having unpredictability, having variables like that. And I think Jesse Marsh has kind of been throwing all those philosophies together at the same time, which has been interesting.
Real quick thing from me. Sorry, Ben, go ahead. Pick up off that.
And of course, you mentioned that street ball aspect, and in playing street ball with you, Alex, the amount of times that you're screaming at people to express yourself on the ball. It seems like Canada was doing that this time, and a few unnamed CanMNT players have made their way out to Sunset Beach street ball as well.
If you're not expressing yourself on the street ball pitch, what are you doing, right? Like, you don't go to the street ball pitch to park the bus and to, hoof it long to the big man. You want to have a bit of fun, but I also think that about real football, right? You got to go out there and have some fun, and I think it's a good balance, and it's nice that Canada has some of those, because it feels like, of course, part of that comes down to development. That you hear all the time about American soccer and Canadian soccer, that it's just they want the big strong lad at 12 that knows how to run in behind and do all those things, that you forget that the 5'6" guy with magical feet, so similar to Lionel Messi, might fall through the cracks because he's not physical enough for that next level. It's nice that Canada's got some guys like Alphonso Davies too. Like, you just see the way he dribbles and expresses himself when he's feeling himself. It's part of the reason why he's been so fun to watch. So yeah, always long live, right? Isn't that what Eric Cantona says in his like rambling speeches that usually tend to mean one thing? Is that you gotta bring that freedom, you gotta bring that expression.
Two things. You hear players from so many countries talk about how they came up with guys that had so much talent and for one reason or another didn't make it. D-Row talks a lot about players with flair, that were more athletic, that were could read the game quicker than him, but for one reason or another didn't make it. And a lot of times it was because they had too much flair. They didn't fit in some type of system. Coach is like, you're rogue. There's too much personality in your game. You can't be controlled. You don't fit in a system. That's it. And they pulled the plug on these guys at young ages, or they just hit a ceiling at 18. There was nowhere to go for these players. And a lot of those guys that's it. Hang up the boots. The game is done. We won't lose players like that anymore. There'll still be some, obviously, for one reason or another. But you're not, we've found a way to reward those players, nurture those players, work with players and personalities like that to get them into the team and get them to the next level. And that's really why you're seeing, this surge now, because we kind of figured that out. That was really the missing piece, And I think when there's always comparisons to the American game, right? That's where the U.S. is now, where I think they with infrastructure, with money, they were able to build a system. They were able to expand their talent network, and they were able to, develop players that fit into the way that they were progressing, but now they've hit the stalemate, and I think it's one of the biggest lacks is individuality and personality. Now, I wasn't intending to go there. What I did want to say is, Alex, listening to you at Street Ball and just in general, you love expressive football. I'm still a few years away from being soccer dad, but when my kid is playing at Tykes, and I'm coaching, you're getting the assistant phone call, buddy. I want you on the sidelines to show them how to express themselves and also teach me tactically how to play them. That's I'm gonna need you, buddy.
Yeah, so we can have some fun there, Brendan. Even get an NFP coaching staff going on. I feel like we could get some pretty interesting.
Oh man, Shaughnessy City, let's go. Oh God, we'll get. I'll always have a guest spot. We'll get Toss to come out. Paul Dolan will come and do a session. Yeah.
Well, that'll be goalkeeper coach, right?
There you go.
Especially if Rock wants to wear the gloves. Which,
man,
the
way that he's growing, he might be like the goal. He might be the goalkeeper in the big green. He might be. He might just go in goal because he's the biggest guy.
And from Jordan SC in our caps, was Davies a downgrade to Larea when he came on, and is Davies' best position on this team left back, much better going forward than defending in the defensive third? I do think his best position is left back because, and Marsh has said it throughout the tournament, when he's doing what he's good at, he's one of the best players on the team. When he takes on more responsibility, that's where you start to see Alphonso Davies kind of fail. There were a few times in this third place game where, he tried to beat a couple defenders and you look at him, you're like, okay, do it. But it's been a while since he's been able to, do that. And it hasn't necessarily happened against the top opposition in a Canadian shirt. Sure, he does it when he's in a Bayern shirt, but he hasn't done it in a while in a Canadian shirt in terms of one of those magical runs. Everyone thinks of the Panama goal and thinks he can do it all the time. But when he's the left back, I think that's where you see the best Alphonso Davies.
Just waiting for him to Nelson Semedo everybody, every time he marks up one-on-one.
That's why it's funny to see the ghost of Nelson Semedo make an appearance for Portugal this tournament. But
nice to see he's still continued in the game and he's pursued new heights. Yes, hasn't been broken by Alphonso Davies.
Yes, I imagine that would have been quite the statement. But yeah, it's for Alphonso Davies. I don't think this discussion's going anywhere soon, but I think it's interesting to see Marsh kind of backtrack from the earlier ideas. Maybe it was fully mind games. Maybe he's changed his opinion of. He kind of said he wanted Davies higher up the pitch. Now it seems to be entrenched at left back, and I don't mind it. I think, again, this tournament, was it his flashiest tournament? No, but it felt like it was one of his most solid and consistent for Canada, and that's, again, solid and consistency are not bad things from a world-class player. Consistency and solidity means that they're usually doing world-class things more often than not, right? It's not mercurial, it's not inconsistent. And I think there's still another level to hit offensively. I think he showed it in glimpses against Argentina in that first game, that he can make a difference offensively. They're still figuring out the best way to do it. I think that's another reason to push for a 4-2-3-1. Why? Because if there's a formation, say in that formation, hypothetical best 11, we don't need to throw out names, but you imagine it's Kone and Eustachio in a midfield pivot. The number 10, take your pick, Osorio, Schwanier, Ahmed, whatever, doesn't matter. In that formation, what we see a lot of from Eustachio anyways is he drops and makes a back three in possession because he's a good passer from deep. He can kind of do that. We're going to see a lot of Davies being freed up as a result of that, whereas in the 4-2-2, Eustachio can't drop down as much. Why? Because if he does, he leaves a Kone on an island in the middle because there's not already a midfielder there, whereas in that 4-2-3-1, if Eustachio does it, Osorio drops in and it kind of creates like a 3-4-3 in possession or like a 3-3-4 as we see a lot of modern teams do. Alphonso Davies gets freed up more. So I think we're yet to see the best version of himself offensively, but considering this has been his best tournament defensively, his best stretch defensively for Canada, and that he's a pretty darn good defender. He's grown a lot from when he was 19, and people are like, oh, left back up Bayern, no way, he can't defend at that level. It's been interesting to see that progress.
And from Jay on the spot 12, of the depth players who started, who has impressed you the most?
Oof. I mean, Tawny's been impressive, albeit, yes, he's missed some chances, but he you got to be in the position to get those chances, right? And there was a lot of times where I'm surprised the ball came to him and that the chance was as great as it was. So I think that impressed me. Ali Ahmed, I think I knew that skill set was there, and I'm stupid to have doubted him, especially with you guys. So Bombito impressed me in this tournament. Definitely, I thought that he might challenge Kamal Miller for a spot, but I didn't think that he would, become the guy that he was. And I know against Uruguay, okay, he wasn't, he wasn't the focus, but those are my big takeaways from the tournament as a whole.
Yeah, I think of the depth guys who we kind of saw last game. I think Luc de Fougerolles, like, you gotta shut out the kid's mentality.
Yeah.
Comes in, struggles a bit with the pace, understandable. Like, yeah, first start for Canada, go deal with Darwin Nunez, will ya? And like, yeah, he struggled. I also think he got done really dirty by that yellow card. It's a yellow card all day, all week. But all tournament, he was probably sitting there on the bench watching worse tackles than that go unpunished. He's sitting there like, I want to impress my teammates. I want to impress Jesse Marsh. I'm a lad who's grown up playing in England. Let's stick it in on someone. Gets a yellow. You can almost see the confusion in the face where he's like, you're probably like right that it's a yellow, but like, why me? Like, how many games have you seen guys like get murdered essentially, for a lack of a better way, and just like refs like, yeah, play on, guys. Like that Copa America final, unbelievable some of the fouls they were letting play on. But then, considering that it was just like he looked overwhelmed. He grew into the game so nicely. Like, he's an 18-year-old center back. Like, center backs peak so much later. The fact that he's already got those, like, that mental side to his game makes me really excited, because the skills are there. You can see it. His passing's very good. You can see he has a good tackle. He made some nice ones in this game. Yeah, his positioning will come with time. Yeah, there's some other areas of his game that, like, he's 18 and you have to remember he's only been transitioned into a center back like last year. He was a fullback midfielder before. Makes me super excited, because that sort of stuff you can't teach. And I really hope he gets minutes at the club level going forward, because there's long-term an idea of like a Bombito de Fougerolles partnership when, both of them hit their ceilings is a very tantalizing possibility. Otherwise, some names I shouted out Chouanier earlier. I just think if in the right setup, he could really be an interesting piece on this Canadian team. Ali Ahmed, we don't really need to throw too much at. Otherwise, I think if I'm going to give a bit of a fun shout, Jonathan Osorio. Like, he entered this tournament, we had no idea what to make of where he fits. Is he going to start? Is he going to come off the bench? Is he a 10? Is he a 6? Where does he fit in Jesse Marsh's system? And he stepped up so quietly good in a lot of games, and by that third place game he was so good in that number 10 role. And with Canada having a lack of number 10s, maybe it's something where you see him start in that role in some games going forward. And I think that he offers something for Canada in that. And I think it's been good to see what he can bring offensively to this Canadian team for a guy who, you could argue based on form that his spot in the squad over the last year has been in a precarious position, because he's had injuries. TFC struggled. Chouanier, Ahmed, all these guys have been doing so great. Osorio really helped his stock this tournament, I find.
I agree with Osorio for sure. And on de Fougerolles, just quickly, Darwin Nunez seemed a lot for him, but he was so good with Luis Suarez. He did not seem phased at all. You talking about growing, into the match. He looked like a 25-year-old experienced center back by the time he was dealing with Luis Suarez. I thought he was exceptional, de Fougerolles.
And from Nick Spirit, Tanny has shown great promise but can't finish. Those minutes could have gone to Ugbo. Do we know anything more about Ugbo's status?
So he's just, taking the break, taking the vacation he needs. Now it's all the big focus is his club future. Because, of course, Trois National, I don't think we're going to see much of Ugbo playing in the third tier of France. So it's just figuring out the links. Sounds like it's been a lot of championship clubs have been after him. So hopefully he can just get some consistency at the club level, and we'll see from there. But for what it's worth with Tani Oluwasi, I will always say this, the hardest skill for strikers to learn is how to get open, how to have good off-ball movement, how to constantly be running, hold up play. And he impressed me in all those areas this term. He can hold up the ball. He can. Look at that pass he made to Osorio in this Uruguay game. I didn't know he had that in his game either. He's got that side to it as well. He constantly gets open. He'll learn how to finish. And I say that he already has shown he can finish. He scored at college level. He went in the USL and tore it up. He's gone MLS and tore it up. I think for him, it was just the speed of play, the level. It's a step up. You have to remember that for him, the last 2 years, it's just been constant going up a level, going up a level, going up a level. It is a big jump to, you're going out and trying to score against Argentina and Uruguay and all these teams. he's not quite at that level yet, but I think the fact that he showed he can translate all those skills, like his movement, etc. Watch out, because I'm telling you, strikers, they don't learn that. Like, I'd rather have a striker who misses 4 or 5 chances in a game, because over time you can learn how to fix that if you're constantly getting in those positions. You can't learn how to get open like that. So I liked what I saw despite the misses.
And looking at the big picture as well, from El Terrifico, who was the CanMNT's MVP during Copa America, Johnston, Cornelius, or someone else? And I do think you have to look at Alistair Johnston, because he played nearly every minute in this tournament, and he didn't look out of sorts really any time.
Yeah, Johnston's a good shout. I think for me, Max Crepeau, because he made some huge saves. You know, in both losses to Argentina, the scoreline could have been a lot worse if not for him. You know, and the scoreline could have been better for Canada if they'd finished in front as well. But I thought he was immense, and you know, having missed the World Cup, where he may not have played a lot. I genuinely think if he's fit and healthy, he starts against Croatia. I really do think that Herdman realized that was a way to influence the game, not have Milan in there. But I'm really glad that he got this moment and absolutely shined. He was, you know, up there with Emi Martinez in terms of performances. Max Crepeau was immense for Canada.
Yeah, I'd probably, if I were to pick my first two, you guys kind of took them there with Johnston and Crepeau, so I'll just throw out a different name. I like the Cornelius shout there from El Terrifico. Like, he was so solid and steady throughout this tournament, and this was a big moment for him. Like, he's been in this program for a long time, but he hasn't really had... It seemed like in 2019 he was going to be the guy, and then he kind of lost that rhythm. Kamal Miller really steps up out of nowhere, takes his spot. And Cornelius has been in the weeds ever since, and he's kind of gotten almost like a stiff end of the stick where just like he deserved more of a shot, and it blew my mind. Did you know he only played one game during those entire World Cup qualifiers, like whatever it was, 18 games? It was that one game against Jamaica. Like, that's bonkers. Like, Herdman was rotating his center backs, giving guys a shot. Cornelius was just constantly on the outside looking in. And I just love the determination he's shown to get to this point, to earn this spot, and how steady it looks. Because you have to remember, his growth as a center back, he's shown the skill since day one, but the other sides of his game, he's been growing, the mental side, just his becoming a leader. And I think you saw it the way he was able to work with Bombito and really take him under his wing a bit, in the sense that, like, Bombito was coming into this stage for the first time. So shout out to what Derek Cornelius showed, and it's going to be fascinating to see that center back battle going forward. Of course, Cornelius, Bombito, Kamal Miller's still in that mix. Can't forget if a healthy Scott Kennedy, if he can slot into that mix. You got Luke DeFougerol if he can get some first team minutes. But Cornelius has definitely done well to improve his stock in that regard.
And for Mick_Maz, how would you assess Jesse Marsh's performance at the Copa America as a whole?
Like a letter grade? I mean, it's got to be a A, and I'm holding back the A+ just because I don't know. I don't want to be the guy that throws around A+, but really, this was as phenomenal an experience for a first-time manager, someone who, yes, he has Canadian experience having been here before, but I think in general, you know, when a foreigner comes to a new place, they have a bit of time to settle in and get to know players and move their belongings and, you know, get to know a place. And he had 7 weeks. And he had 7 weeks to immediately instill a system that, is very much trial and error at the international level. And for a guy who is learning that experience, having only done it as an assistant before, it was remarkable. I thought they incrementally got better with every single game. We could all see that. The individual heights that some players reached under him, I think they had hit ceilings with Herdman, or may not have been able to reach in the way that they were playing before. We can confidently say that, like, you know, when Canada go up against CONCACAF opposition now, they're the top 3 in the region. We now expect Canada to obliterate all CONCACAF opposition, and then definitely contend and look the part against Mexico and the States. And we're excited to see how they play against teams from other places. And I think we were all fearful after that 4-0 Holland debut that maybe that wouldn't be the case. And here we are after having this 9-game run with Jesse Marsh, and with way more positives than negatives.
I'd say if you're going A, I'd probably go like A-, in the sense that you got to keep the, bit of a ceiling for future tournaments. rooms to improve. And I think there are still areas where Jesse Marsh's tournament wasn't perfect. For example, could he have used more depth throughout the group stages and round and quarterfinals, so that by the time the semifinals came around, his team wasn't gassed out for sure. Other little things, but for the most part, he pushed a lot of the right buttons with this group. He really won over a nation who was skeptical sometimes of his past, dealings, his passport, and all those things. I think he did well to put a lot of that behind, and people have really stepped up and like, oh, I like this guy. Like he's the kind of guy you want to root for. You look at the way this Canadian team has finally been able to get on track as regard to the trajectory they were on before the World Cup that seemed to be halted with how chaotic 2023 is. Like he's done a lot to put it back in that regard. So I'd go an A-, and definitely close to giving an A.
Yeah, for me, it's got to be an A+. I don't think there's any way Canada could have done, much better. When you get into the semifinal, you think, maybe that Canada could have won it. But I don't think there's much that he could have done better. He captured the hearts of a nation. He completely reinvigorated the men's national team and did well at the Copa America. Maybe if penalties go better, it could have been an A++, but, I think it has to be an A+ for how he did this tournament.
I like positive Benny. Yeah. Positive Benny Betty Banga. There you go.
And for Mick_Maz, who is your biggest surprise and biggest disappointment for Canada at the Copa America? Of course, we talked about best player of the tournament, but I think biggest surprise has to probably be Jacob Schaffelberg. Just how he, had a bit of a breakout tournament, and biggest disappointment got to be Kyle Larin and the way that he just failed to deliver up front.
Yeah, I think biggest surprise, Schaffelberg's the easy answer. I think another one is like just how quickly Moise Bombito and Derek Cornelius stepped up as a strong center back pair that was able to help Canada immensely defensively. Biggest disappointment, just the goals in general. And I think the fact that, Larin is a big part of that. He didn't score again at a major tournament for Canada's all-time top men's scorer. That's a bit of a surprise. Then Jonathan David, Jonathan David had a quiet tournament. I mean, it's good for Jonathan David that a quiet tournament still means being like third in the Golden Boot race. You contributed on 3 of Canada's 4 goals. There's another level there, and we all know that. So I definitely would say that just the attack at large, and I think those two are probably the big factors, considering that when both of them weren't on, or at least didn't start, Canada was able to find 2 goals for the first time under Jesse Marsh.
And from Oz Sweeney, this team feels like it's ready for the next level. They just need to be clinical and mature and seeing games out. How many opportunities do we have to play friendlies against top-level opposition ahead of 2026? And from James Yu, will BMO Field's natural grass help attract a higher-level opponent for future friendlies? Personally, I would love to see a friendly at home against one of England or Italy. And I think not just in terms of the big opponent, but showing people that Canada can play with these teams, because watching Euros, I think Canada beats Italy most days of the week this time around, and I think they could give a proper game to England as well.
I mean, it would just be good for the nation as well to have some high quality friendly games, because you have to remember that now Copa America is done. People got on the bandwagon for this. It was great, but you got to keep the interest. And I think a good way to keep that interest is that, again, there was something that in 2023, they didn't really get that chance to keep that interest. I mean, there was, of course, the game in March, but it was, a Nations League match. And then in June, it was the Gold Cup with a bit of a rotated team. I think a high-level friendly would be a great way. Like, oh, yeah, there's this thing in 2 years. Let's keep this momentum going. And I think that's the next step for Kevin Blue. Now that there's been this windfall of cash that will come in from this tournament, now that there's interest in the program, Kevin Blue can hopefully weaponize that to his advantage, that it doesn't have to be Mexico and the U.S. in the U.S., where, okay, Canada can bring in these teams that can afford to pay the appearance fees. And, hey, who knows, maybe with the interest in this team, they can recoup some money through ticket sales and the rest, that it can be viable for them to host some friendlies. And based on how Kevin Blue has operated in his first 6 months in charge, I wouldn't put it past him. So excited to see if they can bring in some high-level teams, even if it's not outside of Europe. Like, bring in an African team, bring in another South American team now that you've played a bunch of them, bring in an Asian team. I think there's a market for all of that. I think it's just the high-level games with some good teams. This is the goal.
I think personally it has to be a European team, just to keep that excitement at that level, because, if I was even thinking this, if they brought in, say, a Uruguay again, at that level, there's still a level of talking yourself into this is, a top team in the world. And this is like a sexy opponent. Like, it's easy for, people who follow the game even tangentially. But I think the thing that Canada has done in this tournament, did at the World Cup, and could do with a friendly is, get on the, hit radio stations, get them talking about Canada soccer and stuff like that. Get them on, the random local news that nobody really cares about soccer. Like, I was listening to, one of the pop music stations in Toronto, and they're talking about diving at the Copa America. It's like, okay, I don't love the topic, but we're at least talking about Canada at the Copa America, and that doesn't happen with Japan, Uruguay, Morocco, like good teams from some of the confederations that you mentioned. That happens, and I don't think to a greater level than with England or Italy. And so that's why those two kind of stand out to me as major opponents to play. I don't even think it happens with an Argentina anymore because Canada's kind of lost a little bit.
If Messi comes to Canada,
player.
like that's just gonna be like, come on, let's.
I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. I think
the
it's
defending
lost
World Cup champions. No, I think Argentina is an exception to that rule. All I would say is, it's Brazil. I think Brazil is also of that caliber. You do have to remember, I like the idea of bringing a European team just because it is, this country's football is based on a lot of Eurocentric ideals and, leagues and whatnot. It's also the European schedule does no favors in that regard. I just searched up France, and it's like, oh yeah, they got full Nations League windows in September, October, November. I think the reality is, as much as you'd like a European schedule with their calendar is ridiculous, by the way. It's like either you're in Nations League, which also serve as Euro qualifiers, either you're in World Cup qualifiers. Like, there aren't many windows where you can get these sorts of teams that it's okay to also, like, I don't think a South Korea with the Heung-min Son and that team coming is a bad option. I think that would be a great friendly for Canada. I still think there's enough star power that, like Heung-min Son, Tottenham Hotspur star, like, it's not, of course, ideally you'd get the European teams, and I would agree that they're preferential, but I also just don't know how realistic they are with their damn schedule.
Okay, go ahead and get Brazil now. That's the one team that Canada would have loved to face the Copa America in terms of preparation, in terms of going up against a good team, and with the way that Brazil's playing, maybe one that you could beat as well. But from Canadian dad strength and Northern Football fan, after this Copa journey, and the European camp was also an incredible experience, do you think that there's going to be some players to move on to a bigger stage, potentially to a top 5 league?
I think absolutely. I think we're already starting to see it with some of these guys being linked with moves to elsewhere, and now it's it's going to be exciting to see who's next. Of course, we've seen Ismael Kone make that jump. Definitely feels like Moise Bombito is going to attract interest based on his ceiling as what he can provide, and I think just Ligue 1 teams should be all over all over what he can bring. Alistair Johnson's a bit of an interesting one where quietly Celtic's always been a team that pushes guys up to a higher level. You see everything about what Johnson's brought this tournament. He had such a good tournament. Is he someone people look at? I'm very curious to see, about an Alistair Johnson. And then, of course, I think from there, most of the other guys are, guys within MLS, kind of Jacob Schaffelberg. I think for Schaffelberg, a Netherlands, an Eredivisie would make a lot of sense, a Belgium. But for example, like an Ali Ahmed, where does he fall? Is he in a similar boat where it's maybe a league just outside the top 5 leagues or something in? Will be interesting to see where that falls. And then just another name, of course, because he has been linked to a top 5 league, Theo Bair. That's, he shows the value of going to a league like Scotland, lighting it up. It is easier to make that jump than straight MLS to a top 5 league. So maybe it adds to the idea that some of those Ahmeds and Chouaniers and other players, that it might be worth going for a bit of a transit first before going to a top 5 league.
And from Andrew Thompson, how does Theo Bair's game fit into the style of Ligue 1?
Yeah, for sure. For those unfamiliar, L'Equipe, who's usually generally pretty reliable on that stuff, reported that for 1.3 million euros or whereabouts, that Theo Bair might be heading to Auxerre, freshly promoted. For what it's worth, I'd heard that somewhere in the grapevine recently, so this is not anything new. I'd say it's pretty strong links and something that Theo Bair is absolutely considering. And that's exciting because I think for Ligue 1, we'll continue to say it's a great developmental league, and I think like a guy for Theo Bair, what he could bring physically, his speed, etc., but combined with the technical game, which he has, but can of course continue to improve, he can fit well. And I think with a club like Auxerre, the fact they're freshly promoted, they'll be willing to give him a shot to lead the line. And Theobair's shown that in Scotland, he wasn't on a top club scoring goals. He can be the lone man on a team and bring them or push them up the table. So I think there's a lot of boxes for Theobair to tick at a move like this, and it's super exciting to see him use the most of playing in Scotland and potentially go play in France. And he also speaks French. He's Ottawa native, so it does help the transition a bit as well.
And from Jay on the spot 12, after Canada's performance in this tournament, do you feel not just confident about getting out of the group at the World Cup, but also being first? Of course, if Canada comes first, they could play all the way up to a quarterfinal at BC Place, and that would be great. I don't necessarily have that confidence that they would finish first, but I do have confidence they'll get out of the group.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's outrageous, though, that, well, I think out of the group has to be the bar, right? Because it's, the format of the teams. It's going to be 3 teams getting out of most groups, right? Like that pretty much sets it that Canada should get out of the group. Really, the big thing is the pot 2 team, because Canada will be a pot 1 team. That's the nice thing. You don't have to worry about FIFA rankings, because Canada did leave some FIFA rankings points on the table this tournament with all the penalty shootouts. While they count as wins from a normal standpoint, they don't count as wins for FIFA points, and that hurt Canada. They could have been a top 35 team, and I think they just climb up to 41. But also I think it depends. So the pot 2 is so hit or miss. Like there's some teams that will be in pot 2, like a Belgium. We're like, yeah, Canada should beat a Belgium, assuming they make it to the World Cup. But also you could get a team on the rise, like like a Netherlands, who's they're still kind of ranked in and around pot 2, depending on the time. And there's some other programs. So I don't think there's a reason why they can't push to number 1, because Canada's shown they can go toe-to-toe with those teams, but the draw will ultimately decide. But definitely it feels like a quarterfinal is a lot more realistic at that next World Cup than it felt like a month ago, and that's a credit to Jesse Marsh and this young group of players for how quickly they've gelled this tournament.
And just quickly as well, and we'll get into it more on future podcasts ahead of the Olympic Games, but the women's national team 2-1 winners over Australia, and from W Soccer CA, the CanMNT struggled in midfield and their offensive identity. What will they have to fix before the Olympics?
Yeah, it just felt like they kind of lacked a bit of fluidity in the attack, and the midfield was kind of getting pressed in that game. Jessie Fleming had a bit of a rare off game, and I don't think you can really afford that in a double pivot, 'cause she's so central to everything that Canada does. She makes the giveaway on the Australia goal a bit uncharacteristic, but I just didn't really like the wide areas. Like I felt like the wing backs of Ashley Lawrence and Jade Riviere could have been more involved. The front 3 as well, the wingers and Leon and Lacasse, they were just kind of not occupying the right spaces. You want the wing backs to provide width and the wingers to kind of to tuck inside and play off each other, and it just wasn't all that. So I'd say look at the wide areas. I think when Canada got their goals, they started getting wide areas more and started to use those overloads, so that's a good thing. And then the midfield changes at halftime helped. And those are going to be key heading into the Olympics. So that was probably the big thing that did stand out from this Australia game. But overall, they got the win. They got a chance to test a bunch of players. Some of the alternates look good, which, maybe with these supposed rule tweaks that are happening is good news for a Deanne Rose, who had her best game in months off the bench. Gabby Carl continues to look good. That, hey, maybe there is a role for them to play at these Olympics, because they could be needed for Canada.
And so we've got for episode 182 of the Northern Fútbol Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in here on the Nation Network, and make sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review as well.